take a stand for online artistic expression every year. So that's me.
I can definitely attest to that everyone should go and check out what Michael is talking about. The redacted NFT, it's phenomenal. The story behind it is phenomenal. So go check it out when you can. DAO operator sounds extremely cool. I'm jealous now. My title is not that cool. I'm Yana. I work at Zora, and I initially led brand and marketing at Zora, and then we launched an editorial project that's called Zora Zine. So now I'm leading the zine, and we have a lot of kind of insights and learnings and thoughts about new type of media, the blockchain native media, and how the future media, decentralized media, should actually exist, because there are a lot of questions to the existing Web2 media and how it operates. So happy to talk about this today.
It's almost a perfect segue, huh? Farouk, founder of Rug Radio, Web3 decentralized media ecosystem that's actually governed by DAO, the Rug DAO. So very happy and always excited to nerd out about decentralized media and all those things, and the power of DAOs actually.
Amazing. So we have a few DAOs, DAO operators, and institutions looking into being in DAOs on stage. So it's very interesting. So I actually want to start with a question for Michael around institutions. So obviously with Rhizome was very much a new way of thinking about institutions in general when it started, and where it's gone. Where do you see institutions today, and how does that get defined in today's context?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Rhizome has this unusual status of an organization that started as really an email list. At various points in its history, it's been a .com startup. It's been a nonprofit. It's had kind of all these different lives, and I think this question of what is an institution came up for us really again in a pressing way around the rise of Web3 over the past couple of years. Last year, we even had a conference dedicated to it. So as part of that, we thought about what makes Rhizome an institution and what is an institution, because we don't have a building, we don't have an endowment, and in a way, it feels like the organization only exists because every day we wake up and decide there should be a thing called Rhizome in the world. So I have this definition which came from a writer named Malcolm Harris, I think, that was possibly embarrassingly just on his Twitter or something, but he was saying that an institution is a set of social practices that are repeated for long enough that they become kind of durable. And I think that temporal quality of an institution is really important and interesting to think about, that in some ways the institution is an inherited structure of the past. And I like that this definition is flexible enough to accommodate things like ancestral relations or other kinds of practices that are not as culturally specific to the West. So in thinking about that idea of recurring practices over time, I want to point out that an institution is something positive in the sense that it allows a society to understand itself over time, but also that temporal quality can be negative. An institution can be wielding power from the past in a toxic way. And I think a lot of the institutions that we've inherited in this city and this country are from people who had capital in the past that were extractive colonial powers of various kinds. So the question of being an institution might sound aspirational, but it's also something to be cautious about as well, I think, for that reason.
Yeah. To that point, in creating DAOs, how does Tribute think about it, Max? How does Tribute think about not just creating DAOs, but then how they're operated?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the rule of thumb in general is to try to let it happen organically. It's kind of a member-led process. I think, in my experience at least, the best DAOs and kind of the most potent communities do kind of emerge organically. So oftentimes it'll be a new category, space, project, anything that gets people really excited. And before you know it, people are kind of congregating on their own to talk about. They're organizing, separate calls to discuss this one topic. And so it just kind of happens naturally, and we say, all right, let's throw an LLC behind this, basically, and get going. And then, in terms of operating it, it's very much the same process. Our role is kind of to be a guiding hand for the DAO and help them sort of execute this vision that they have, but not so much to really dictate in any way where they go and what they do. You know, there's something really special that I think a lot of people here have probably experienced when you take a group of people that have this common goal and common set of values and basically put them in the same room, let them solve problems together, make decisions together, hopefully, you know, back projects together, build projects together, and from there, it's really just a flywheel. It kind of carries itself.
Amazing. So, Fro, tell us a bit about how Rug Radio became a DAO. I mean, the story, I think, of Rug itself is pretty wild. But maybe talk about its inception and then how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, Rug Radio was born out of a Twitter space, actually. I've been doing media for over 10 years now. I started a media brand, like a, you know, boutique sort of like media agency when I was 18 years old. 28 now, and so I've been doing media for a very long time. And then I got into the space. I'm sure like a lot of y'all, and obviously went down the rabbit hole, and you know, just left everything for that. And months in, like one day, we're just like kind of like, you know, talking on Twitter Spaces. Like there's thousands of people in the audience, and we're just vibing. Like it was like late 2021, and we're going for 10 hours straight. And then, you know, we kept getting rugged from the tech. Like Twitter Spaces kept like rugging us. Like it would literally like my phone would like turn purple and overheat. It was crazy. Like that's how. For those of you who are on Twitter Spaces, you would know like when you would host, it would go crazy. Anyways, I kept coming back. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna call this Rug Radio because like we get rugged and it's like a radio, right? Because like you're live, it's live social audio, and I love it. And then I was like, wait, like why don't I start like a media brand, a media ecosystem, a media company, whatever you want to call it, right? Like using the power of this blockchain where we can actually empower creators to create content and own their IP and get rewarded for doing so, but also the participants, so you guys in the audience, for being there, for listening, for consuming the content, for participating within that. And I was like, well, wait. So I'm not a crypto OG, right? But I'm an internet kid. Like I understand memetics. You know, Punk6529 says, seize the means of production. We've been creating the memes of production for years. I'm like, I know how to do that, right? So I was like, who on this stage, like who in this audience can build this model I have in my head, which would be like a tokenized media brand where like people actually get to own it, right? People get to have a say in it. Because I'm pretty sure over the last few months in crypto, you know, we talk about decentralizations. I've heard about DAOs. I've heard about the power of like tokenizing, you know, brands, whatever, everything. And that's when I met this lady called Mel. And so she built the entire, you know, the tokenomic structure behind it with Syndicate DAO, actually. And so we partnered with Will Papper and his team to build the Rug token, the Rug DAO token, and the DAO. And we just went right off the bat, like with the goal to build a decentralized media brand, because there's a whole lot of media companies out there. They're great in Web 2. Some of them are great. Some of them are not so great, right? But there was not a true Web 3 media ecosystem where the people actually had a say in it and could help build the thing, right? So we went and we just launched as a DAO right off the bat. Amazing.
So, I mean, I can say for something like Refraction, being a DAO has allowed us in the first year to do, say, 25 events around the world. Work with all these different artists, invite different artists in, do all these different creative projects, creative grants, etc. As Michael was joking around, kind of whatever we feel like doing to some extent. How does that work around a media company?
You know, it's really cool because for me, like, DAOs are extremely powerful because it's like building a brand on steroids. It's because you have the ability to empower people to help you build something greater than you could ever imagine. Like, I can only do so much as a founder, right? I can only do so much with my co-CEO or like the team members that we have and whatnot. But when you actually empower your community to help you create and build, I think this is where you hit like the perfect like point in the space where you can actually build something else. For media, the way it works is it's actually very interesting. We have a token, which is the Rug token, which is our native token, right? And then you have the DAO token. So we opted in for a dual token system, right? For intentional governance. I like that. And so basically, and everything we have is in a DAO. So the core team, the salaries, the treasury, everything. So when we launched Rug Radio in January 2022, I put 50% of the primary sales directly into the DAO, all on chain, and everything that we make, all the partnerships, everything goes through the DAO as well, which is super cool. So that's how we built it. And as long as you manage to find the perfect way, and there is no perfect way, but we try to perfect it every day, to bring value back to the ecosystem, to the participants, and to its creators, then you have this everlasting, circle or triangle or whatever you want to put it as, right? And it just works out pretty well that way within media. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, and I think it relates to the framework or why one would create a DAO. So Jana, you've been in many DAOs, a real advocate of DAOs over the years. I wonder if you could talk about your experiences there and also Zine and some of the things upcoming with Zine and some of the ways you're thinking about Zine as a project at this point.
I think it's super important, probably two things to understand. First is that there is no blueprint for a DAO yet. Every single DAO is extremely unique, and it's a complete experiment, especially when it comes to frameworks or collective co-creation, all those things. Even I'm super curious about your experience, Farouk, even with like just management and accounting. I'm sure that every single DAO is just like figuring it out. So me being involved in different DAOs, including the Unicorn DAO, which I know you guys are working with, it means that every single journey, every single team is extremely unique, and then which is really great that DAO gives you ability to pivot very quickly. You might have like a launch this week, or a call this week, and then realize and gather the feedback that doesn't work. This model needs to be changed, and then pivot extremely quickly. So I think that just creates a different type of flexibility and probably creates a different type of agility and speed comparing to vertical structures. And the way how we're thinking about DAO for Zine, we're not thinking about DAO just yet. However, someone recently posted on Twitter, there's idea about proto DAO, which is like kind of the pre-step before you launch a DAO, and it really resonated with me. And I think there are a lot of, before you kind of literally jump, the gun and start an entity, you can still, which no perfect entity exists for a DAO, right? You can kind of start prototyping and testing some of the ideas and governance with your community before you'll actually fully commit to it.
That's really interesting, and I think it's really important because it's really hard to know what you're going to create, and it always changes all the time. So Rhizo, Michael, has been thinking about becoming a DAO or looking into the conceptual framework. Can you talk about what it's like for an institution to go through that, some challenges, maybe some ways to think about it and everything else?
Yeah, we've been having a conversation. So when Raphael Rosendahl made a donation as part of his nameless NFT sale in 2021, we allotted a portion of those funds to starting a DAO. And the concept of our DAO was that we would get together and have dinner and make all of our decisions in person. So we gathered this small group of people, and we would get together and eat dinner. And alongside this, we were doing research. I think what we realized is that the nonprofit structure implies a legal accountability for everything that we do. We have to make sure that the actions that we are making as an organization are in line with our mission. That's the kind of basis of our legal status and our tax status. And I think we never really could figure out a way to create a sufficient shield between a DAO and an institution. So we've been thinking about, starting DAOs that artists run as kind of experiments that Rhizome can really, and we've already in some ways supported other artists that are thinking about DAOs, and I think that's something that we plan to continue. But I think beyond that, I think there's this kind of interesting conversation to be had about how a DAO and institution could be kind of mutually beneficial entities that feed off one another. But one of the things that our DAO group really arrived at, that they all wanted to write more about DAOs, and I think they all also wanted to think about DAOs that could be time limited in relation to our first definition. I thought that was kind of an interesting question, a DAO that's specifically designed not to become an institution, but to exist for a short time for some purpose, potentially a ridiculous one. So that was kind of where we got up to with our work so far. And we plan to continue that research towards the next edition of 7 on 7 this fall.
Amazing. And 7 on 7, which of course was the place where the first NFT was ever minted.
That's
so
sick.
They say.
That's pretty sick. I remember selling at Sotheby's that one day. I was sick to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing to be there. I think some people in the audience were dismissive. One person minted his own NFT while watching it after seeing how it was done. And I think, it was interesting. Yeah, Kevin McCoy was the person that did it, and it was interesting because he went on to start a company called Monograph, and he spent the next 3 years really pushing that boulder up the hill. So by the time 2018 rolled around, I was like, this NFT thing, it's never going to work. Look at this poor guy, And I met John Crane. We'd go surfing. I'd be like, how's your new NFT platform going? And lo and behold.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember...
Called that one.
I remember us going out for coffee a few days after, and he's like, what do you think? And I was like, seems pretty cool. I think it makes sense. Max, how do you see, how many DAOs are within Tribute now?
It's something like 23.
23.
Yeah.
So what do you see working and not working? Let's add some honesty because, a lot of DAOs have started. Some DAOs have closed quickly. Some have had issues. Some have kind of flow along. Some are small. Some are larger. They're structured differently. What do you see working and not? And have you had any situations challenges or things that have happened with certain DAOs, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the biggest challenges, which is kind of a recurring one, is just that, and I'd be curious to get other thoughts on this, but DAOs aren't very nimble organizations. So when they have to be kind of reactive as opposed to proactive, sometimes can fall behind a little bit. With a DAO that's set up with the mission of, putting together the preeminent collection of a certain kind of NFT, that's obviously not an issue, but, when DAOs start to set their sights on, trading assets or kind of investing in more liquid assets, it can be a little bit tricky. It's not impossible. It's just kind of a hurdle that has to be jumped over again and again and again. It's always evolving. There's hundreds of solutions, I think. It's just kind of about finding the right one, and sometimes it can be a learning curve for the whole group in terms of how to set things up so that we are in a position to kind of get around those issues when they arise. I think there are a lot of people that probably would go out and say, though, that DAOs can't be nimble institutions, that they can't, that they ought not to be set up to invest in liquid assets, things like that. I don't necessarily think that's true. I just think it's harder, and it takes it just takes a lot more planning, a lot more close, management, I think.
Interesting. Very interesting. Question? Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I was gonna I love that question, and what I agree with everything you're saying. And I think one of the main problems also is that a lot of people treat a DAO, and most DAOs are just group chats, right? A Telegram chat, a Discord, it's a DAO. But that's not a DAO, right? That's a group chat. And so if you treat it less like a group chat and more like an actual organization, right? Because it literally is in the name. And now if you remove the word autonomous from it and you build a decentralized organization that you actually nurture and care for and build on top of, that's where DAOs can become very powerful. And I think that's where a lot of people fail because they leave it to be autonomous. Like, oh, it's a DAO. You guys go and build it. If I'm not here every day for Rug DAO, then there's no Rug DAO.
It doesn't work. It's like we've been talking a lot in Refraction about the idea of a decentralized collective organization. And in our sort of curatorial mandate for the year, we're talking through this because it's impossible. There's no way you can just do things autonomously and people are just doing it. It's it's literally it's not humans don't operate as such, right? So maybe there's autonomous aspects and everything else, but it's really collective.
Also, why would they do it for free? Why would any of you come and build a Rug DAO and help me out in doing this thing? And it's like you're working for a nonprofit organization at this stage. You may as well go and work for go save the world. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I think if you find the perfect way to actually incentivize people to help you build this thing with a proper structure,
right,
is where people want to you actually start building layers on top of one another. I think that's how it works.
And you can see real collective growth and people believing in the DAO itself, the vision, the token, all these things that actually start to bear weight. Totally. So I have a question kind of for all of you. This is one of our last two questions and the kind of fun ones. Where do you see the future of DAOs? And will they remain DAOs? Will it be something else? What do you think of this? I mean, it's amazing. DAOs are very young, right? It's probably the youngest institutional model. It's also probably the most relevant in a lot of ways to today, because we live in such a, decentralized world with all of these, people are all over, collective groups are like emerging all the time. So I just wanted to go from right to left.
Yeah, it actually goes back to something you were saying a second ago. In my opinion, like I'm really excited about this idea of like a temporary DAO or a DAO with an expiration date, or honestly, a better way of saying that is like a DAO that's spun up for a very narrow purpose, which we actually don't really see that often. I mean, there are a few examples, but I think the idea that a DAO has to be forever is not really founded on much of anything at all. I think something that's really exciting is like getting a group of people who have an idea for something that just might work, and how DAOs can be an effective vehicle for getting them there or not getting them there.
Like buying the Constitution.
Yes, very similar. Yeah,
it was close.
Almost.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like it was a great experiment, and I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed being a part of it. And I think you could take that logic and apply it to endless other contexts. Like I've been playing around with the idea of a DAO whose sole purpose is to acquire 1 million Twitter followers. Like all they do all day, every day is just work together, posting to a single account to try to get 1 million followers. Maybe it works. Probably it doesn't, but it's still a good time. It's still effective. It's exciting. And so that's kind of where I see the future of DAOs, I think, or at least one way.
Michael?
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting vision of like a highly specific DAO that suits a given function. I often think that like the future of DAOs kind of is going to look a lot like the past of cooperative organizing in different ways as well, maybe. Because the problems that DAOs encounter so much are really human problems with very old solutions. And I think as DAOs manage to draw on other forms of knowledge from the past, there might be more of a synthesis there in the future.
Jana?
Can I? Yeah, go ahead.
Personally, I probably believe in the future of either an extremely hyper-local DAOs and extremely small groups of people where people are coming together just, as Max was saying, just passionately working on some very maybe temporary things. Or it's absolutely massive DAO where we want just to be involved, very rarely on and have a vote. Maybe it's the country governance, maybe it's the healthcare, maybe it's the identification system, whatever it is. But I feel like in the middle, we don't always actually want to be involved because there is a such thing in DAO, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, as a decision fatigue. Like once you launch a DAO, you start seeing that maybe only under like 20% of people or even less constantly voting. The rest of the people are just like, you guys figure it out. So I think it's important to kind of figure where people are actually want to be involved and don't expect them to be involved all the time.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
Yeah, that's super true. I'm like uber bullish on DAOs. I think, and the more we're building ours out, like the more passionate I get about it, like genuinely. And I think, 17 was DeFi, 2021 was NFTs, and I think the next run is really gonna like show you what DAOs can actually do. I think I treat each DAO as a country almost with a microeconomy, and it's a living, breathing organism on the blockchain, right? Which is a layer on top of the internet, which is itself fascinating, a whole other panel. But I think like a lot of things could actually become DAOs, could be managed somewhat like an actual institution, like a company who has me accounting, stuff like that. We're full-fledged DAO. Like there's no Rug Radio Inc., LLC, whatever. It's a Kimmian Foundation, right? And it's a DAO. But we operate it in a very professional manner, right? Like everything, like the core team works under the DAO. I work for the Rug DAO in a way, right? Everything I do, all my endeavors, whether it's my show, this panel, everything is with the goal to build the network bigger and better, right? And then what I'm super excited about is how do we make sure that DAOs can interoperate because we talk about interoperability a lot. It's a buzzword almost, right? It's dope, but like, how does RugDAO work with Nouns DAO, work with Syndicate DAO, with Refraction, with the stuff that they're building, what you're doing, and how do we make sure that we build this like super system on the blockchain that all elevates one another? So we'll handle like this part of media, you handle that part of media, you guys got the art stuff going on, you got the event, like, and how do we build on top of that? I think a lot of these, like, we're going to see a lot of economies like be spun off of DAOs actually.
Completely, like the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Each DAO is a living, breathing thing.
The
It's crazy.
hyperstructures.
The hyperstructures.
I like that.
You mentioned like that each DAO is kind of like a government, and I think I wanted to propose that each DAO is maybe a bit like a church.
Or a cult.
Yeah, we had a
It's
at
absolutely
7 on 7 in 2018. Matt Liston proposed a blockchain-based religion with Avery Singer as his collaborator, and I've always thought about that. I know Ben Vickers used the analogy in his republication of the white paper for Ignota Press, but it's like, what gives these collective groups meaning? And I think, Matt really hit on something, which is that like the church has this historic function of like, commissioning art, and the museum in a way inherited that function as a secular religious institution almost. And so thinking about DAOs in those terms is extremely productive. And when you look at them from that framework, you see, so many ways in which there's similarities already that it maybe could be productive to like embrace it explicitly.
That's great. So my last question actually went to Max's first question. So or the first point Max made. So if you could think of one idea that you think should be done as a DAO, it can be simple, big, small, whatever it might be, what would it be? And it can't be something that you're involved with directly. So something that you think in the world could use a DAO for.
So I already gave the one I probably would have said, but the Twitter example. I think another fun one is like, if anyone's ever seen like the Reddit Bureau of Investigations, I think you could easily spin up a DAO whose job is to basically solve like various crimes that are read about on the internet. Sort of like citizen detectives that can all come together under like a kind of more organized institution and try to like do their best to solve crimes.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
It's a really interesting question. I think because we've been doing dinner as our DAO, it's not a proper DAO. Not even a dough, really just dinner. But maybe like a meal-based DAO would be kind of exciting, a potluck DAO.
Amazing.
I have no idea why I'm thinking about it, but I'm thinking something maybe climate-related. Climate or maybe farming, because
Word.
Yeah, I feel like, farmers need our support, and maybe if we can think about the produce and our future, really, all collectively, that would be beautiful.
Amazing. Last one.
That's tough. After they all had great examples too. What should be a DAO? Is that what should be?
Something that you're not involved in. Anything.
Go on, space. No. If anything, genuinely speaking, I would love to see a country
Country
turn
DAO.
into a DAO. Like, I think, like, for example, Japan actually is starting a DAO, the government of Japan itself, like the country.
Wow.
Yeah, and they started DAO for the purpose of exploring what could be done through the power of decentralization and crypto.
Mm-hmm.
Super interesting what's happening out there, while in the USA they're fighting it. And actually, I'm fascinated by that. And so I think that a country, because originally countries are meant to be DAOs. When you think about it, governing body,
Sure.
supposed to be for you guys, by us, for us. You elect the body, there's that. But then there's a whole corrupt into it. Why? Because that's a problem blockchain technology fixes, transparency and all that stuff, right? So I would like to see a whole ass country. Like
I love that.
DAO.
So, I mean, I think that's a great way to end. I want to thank all our speakers. This has been fascinating. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the first panel of this session.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Hand it over to Jim.
Our second panel will begin in about 5 minutes. Art blocks, generative systems, and algorithms. We could get those speakers and the mod up here. That'd be greatly appreciated. 5 minutes. art blocks, generative systems, and algorithms?
No, no art blocks, just
Just generative systems and algorithms. Gotcha. We would like to welcome our second panel, Generative Systems and Algorithms. We've got Sarah from Art Blocks, Danny Loftus, Eric Snowfra, Mario Klingman, and Sophia Garcia.
I take the side.
Okay, I'll take over here.
Testing. Okay, we're good.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
This is so tall. How do you do that? Really wobbly chairs. Beware if you're speaking soon. Hi, everyone. First, Nicole, Malcolm, I think they're over here. Thank you for having us and for putting this on. Super excited. My name is Sarah Rosine. I'm the Associate Artistic Director at Art Blocks. I'm here with Eric, Danny, Sophia, and Mario to speak about generative systems and algorithms. We're very lucky to have this group of people together. Looking forward to discussing how generative systems and algorithms have influenced the curation and the making of art, fashion, and digital platforms. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started with some brief introductions. Want to just go down the line?
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric, also known as Snowfro. And yeah, I'm founder of Art Blocks, longtime creative coder, and just really excited to be here with everybody today. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Danny. I am the founder of a platform called Drop, and we are focusing on bringing the code to couture through generative digital fashion.
Hi, my name is Sophia Garcia. I am a generative art curator, dealer, founder of Artix Code, and I'll leave it at that.
And I'm Mario Klingemann, also known as Quasimondo. Most people have me more down as the AI artist, but actually I have a long history of generative art, so I hope to have something to contribute here as well.
Awesome. You definitely all have things to contribute. I'm pretty confident. Sophia, could you start us out by just positioning what we're talking about today? Can you define what a generative system is?
Oh, okay, yeah, let's get into it. A generative system, or I guess generative, I'll take it a little bit back and just talk about what generative art is as a whole. I do look at generative art as an umbrella term that really is a systems-based approach to creating artwork. This idea of autonomy in the system is quite important. However, you do not need a computer to create generative art, so it's why I really do view it as this umbrella descriptive term. What we talk about a lot on Art Blocks is algorithmic art. So this is art made with an algorithm that is being run with a computer. There's computational power at play, and someone had to write that algorithm. I think those are really key parts of it. And then under that umbrella, we also have AI artwork, machine learning, GANs, things of this sort, which I would allow Mario to cover more so than I. So we'll let him do that. But I think right now we're at a really special moment in our history where this artwork is really being respected for really since its inception in the 60s. Artists were ostracized at the time for working with the computer, what was really viewed as like a war machine, something very cold, and how dare you take something like appropriate human creativity using something like the computer. People were very appalled by that, and so it's a really cool. We're in a really cool place right now that because of, I wouldn't say because of NFTs, there's always been a digital art market, but it's really allowed us to have a kind of global community that can freely share and sell their work because of it. And now we're all here talking about it and excited about it, and we're not getting eggs thrown at us like Manfred Moore did back in the day.
So working off of that definition, I'd like everyone to answer this. What's a generative system that either surprised you or that allowed you to do something that you couldn't do anywhere else? Eric, do you want to start?
Whoa, that's a good question. Gosh, well, I guess I'm going to talk about a project I created called the Chromie Squiggle because it was really kind of a proof of concept of what generative art and NFTs and this kind of confluence of art and technology could be. And so there's the fact that if I had to make 10,000 outputs of even if a 5-year-old could make a rainbow squiggly line, it would take a really long time to make 10,000 of them individually, especially following specific rules, and then being able to distribute them amongst a lot of people. And so to me, I think that the power of being able to automate distribution is something that's very important to me and special, and letting more people participate in the dialogue of an artwork. Yeah.
I think for me, and this is not actually one of my projects, but it's a project that I was just watching Eric discuss, and I think is particularly resonant to the work that we're doing, is the operator drop, which is coming very soon to art blocks. I think for me what was so interesting and surprising about the drop is they are leveraging algorithms within choreography. So I think if you look back on the history of algorithms and also the history of generative art, it's been used for, let's say, more traditional fine art. And I think what's fascinating is the transference that we're seeing of these algorithms from a fine artwork to other systems which may not have previously been viewed as fine art. So the decorative arts or dance, or obviously in the case of what I'm building, fashion. And we are currently operating in a post-automation age. So if you look at the 50s, obviously it was these conceptions of mass production. But now actually we're focusing more on artisanship. So it's this idea that algorithms can be artisanal, can elevate arts like decorative arts, arts like fashion, to these categories of fine art via this repositioning that I think is particularly exciting. And also this leveraging of emotion in that same vein, which Sophia alluded to. So within this operator project, they have created algorithms which generate choreography. So a series of movements, the way that those movements are put together in sequence is algorithmically generated. And then they are going on to correspond to a visual artwork, but they can also be performed live in sequence. So I think this repositioning of generative algorithms into these new fields, for me, is both surprising and also incredibly delightful and exciting about the wider future of the space.
On me? So yeah, for me, like probably for most of us, the kind of surprise element is, of course, what drives me to generative art. But surprise is kind of a, let's say, subform of interestingness. So then the problem with what makes something interesting is that it's a system of diminishing returns, because interesting is always something that stays kind of unpredictable. But with most, let's say, hand-coded generative systems, the more you know about them, the more you can kind of predict the space in which it will move. So for me, actually, most generative art, so let's say when I started out, I was super excited and built all these systems, and it's fantastic, and you press the space bar again, and you get another configuration. But now, I don't know, it's like if you're into kinky sex, then you also need kind of more and more weird stuff. And so maybe I'm into kinky systems that are trying to like surprise me in different ways. So for me, I'm trying to build systems where I don't even know what goes into them. Because if I know what I put in there, what algorithms, whatever, some Voronoi, then I kind of know the range, so it doesn't surprise me as much. And of course, one last thing, and that's why, I don't know, 8 years ago I got so driven into the AI thing, because there you have this whole space of external stuff that comes in which you cannot predict anymore because it's outside of you. So yeah, that's like to answer the question. So at the moment still it's the AI that is more surprising to me than the algorithmic art, even though I like the aesthetics.
You and Helena, Sarah, have a very similar take on this, where you guys like get bored with algorithmic art. That you're like, I don't know, the emergence that comes out from AI is like really exciting. So fun to see. But I think just that idea of chance and emergence is a really popular, reoccurring theme in generative art as a whole, and trying to not knowing what you're going to get when that program runs. So just wanted to underline that.
If we do this panel again, we'll have to call it generative kinky systems.
Yeah, kinky systems.
So Danny, you use AR filters for This Outfit Does Not Exist, which you haven't introduced yet, but tell everyone about that after. And you've released the first ever digital fashion drop with fashion native traits. Could you tell us a bit more about Drop's latest release and also how you see generative systems influencing the way that we experience and the way that we wear digital fashion today?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to. So I think one of the most important things around our incorporation of generative systems into fashion is the fact that over the past 2 or so years, digital fashion seems to have come mainstream. So when I started, not a single large brand was leveraging digital fashion. And in the past 2 years, be it in the form of NFTs, be it in the form of gaming collaborations, every single large fashion house has done this. And so it seems like we've gone mainstream. But in reality, there's been a ton of backlash from the traditional fashion space around what we're doing. It's perceived as a gimmick. And I think a large reason that it's been so substantially undervalued is this idea that it is completely at odds with the value systems that have defined fashion thus far. So instead of skill, there's a perception of scale. Instead of exclusivity, there's this perception of accessibility. And where previously there was artisanship, now there's automation. And what we're really trying to achieve with Drop is to prove that the two are not mutually exclusive. Generative digital fashion, in my eyes, is not at odds with couture, but it's actually its natural extension. So if you look at couture, which is seen as the highest form of fashion, the way that it works is you go to a large couture house and you get a piece which is part of a wider collection from a brand, but it's also completely unique and tailored to you. In the current system, there are only 1,000 couture buyers because of how expensive and exclusive this is. And then if you take the generative algorithm and the generative process, you have the ability to replicate the things that make couture so special, but in its digitally native form. So our first collection is in collaboration with Nicholas Sassoon, and every single collection we build out as a brand, as Drop, is in collaboration with a digitally native artist. And what we really see there is taking this traditional practice of bringing in the best tailors, the best seamstresses, the best creative directors to bring work to life. And so we're actually saying, what does this look like for digitally native craft? What does this look like in the digitally native sense? So for this collection, we are working with Nicholas Sassoon, and Nicholas works a lot with the moire print. And what's fascinating about moire, and he's worked with this for 15 years, is that it actually begun on textiles. So the name moire refers to when two interfering layers produce a third pattern. But the first time it ever emerged was actually on garments in the 16th century on this watered silk called moire, which is now its namesake. Now it's far more commonly associated with images on screens, and most appropriately, images of clothing on screens. So actually, news anchors get told, don't wear a houndstooth jacket. And so, working with Nicholas, he's created layers which correspond to moire patterns. And the way that then we work with our generative algorithms in-house is these layers go through our algorithmic process, and they come to determine the color of our garments, the moire print of our garments, so depending on the angles between the layers, different moire will emerge, and also elements that I term fashion native because they wouldn't be in a traditional artwork, like the cut, for example, the number of folds in the garment, or the material is also established by these layers. And so what we're really trying to show here is this work is couture. This work is working with somebody who's absolutely top of their game to create an element, and then using generative systems to bring these garments together and to bring these garments to life. You as a collector are getting a garment which is completely unique to you, but tied to the rest of the collection with a shared algorithmic thread. And for me, that is the way that our industry has the ability to bring couture truly into the digital age.
Good question. Yesterday's tweet, was that really on your body or not on your body? Was that digital or real?
That was digital.
Yeah. Check out her Twitter account. She was wearing this thing on the subway, and I was like, and it just demonstrates like how exciting and how kind of like mind-opening digital fashion can be. I was really impressed with yesterday.
Her
Sorry,
Instagram,
kind of
this
an aside.
outfit does not exist. I'm just going to hype that up for her.
It's super cool.
Everyone
I was
follow
shocked.
right now.
I was like, it's getting dirty. It's touching the subway. Yeah. Anyways, check it out. It's cool.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, awesome. Mario, I want to go into your work a little bit. You created Memories of Passerby 1, and in that work, you described that the code and the system itself is the artwork. For those who aren't familiar with the work uses neural networks to generate 2 portraits in real time that are continually evolving. And Mario has shared that the work is really the inner working system. Also, the way that the work is displayed, the inner working system is encased in this beautiful mid-century modern piece, so it in itself is made to be an artwork. But Mario, I'd love to go into that more. How do you think about the relationship between human creativity and algorithmic creativity in your work?
Maybe, yeah. Well, I mean, the simple answer is that, of course, I'm always trying to use algorithms or AI to bring something to me that is not inside of myself. And because I always feel like that I actually have very limited imagination, and so using the right tools that are able to use the short time that I have in life to see as much other things that I have already seen before. Because I always think that you can only work from any information you have kind of heard, taken in, or seen, and then your brain might still be able to make new interesting combinations from that information. And but yeah, and I believe that using algorithms is the more efficient way to do that, and especially in combination with AI, because if you just use randomness, you will see actually a lot of just more of the same thing. So you have to have some kind of intelligence that filters through all the noise and redundancy to get the few things that are hopefully standing out. But you still, as a human, have to be able to recognize these as such. I mean, actually, in these days, the ability to judge that something that you see in front of your eyes that the machine is just giving you has some relevance or is in some form different from something else is actually the most important capability that you have to have, because the rest is all now done by the machines. And so, of course, then you have to have that meta capability in realizing, is that system that I currently use actually capable of escaping a certain feedback loop or a certain latent space or a certain possibility space, or is it itself again caught in some kind of typical cliches and repetitions? So to come back to Memories of Passersby, so actually this piece is about interestingness. That's the funny thing. It's not about generating portraits. Of course it is, but so it's actually a long-form work of art, and that's the difficult part in building these systems, is that usually once you have written your algorithm and put it into some engine and some code, it is kind of autonomous, right? It's doing its thing, and it can only then produce interestingness or anything new from what you've given it along the way or how you devise the system. So there's no new information coming in. And so the question was for me, can I create something that somebody still wants to look at in 20 years? And hopefully it still works in 20 years. And so that's why I built this feedback loop. So it's actually, the way it works is there are two neural networks which are going ping pong. So one is looking at whatever the other one shows it and tries to recognize anything that looks like faces and produces a sketch. And that sketch is then taken by the other model and it tries to reconstruct a face from it. And both of them are really bad at it in some way and make mistakes, but the mistakes are exactly where I hope the interesting things are going to happen. It's right at the typical feedback loop when you point a camera at a video monitor, and you just have to find the right kind of balance so it doesn't just go white, or you put a microphone to the speaker, and there are these sweet spots where you find a balance in a system where it behaves. It's in a zone where it's able to float and produce interesting stuff. And so now I lost my. Let me think if I get my point back again. So you have the feedback system, and and so for me, again, as I said before, for me, the entire system and not the single pictures it produces are the interesting thing, because what happens is the longer you look at it, you learn how the system works, and you start having expectations. And a good system is able, even after half a year or 3 months or whatever, to still occasionally show something that is totally out of the distribution, or and that's the beautiful moments. And so it happens. But the problem is, that's the problem with interestingness. You can't kind of force that. Because if you build that system that it continuously does that, we are unfortunately learning that behavior as well. And we say, okay, yeah, so it goes faster or it goes slower. So you have to kind of build something into the system that is out of your control, but allows it to go off and hopefully do something I didn't put in there in 20 years. And so the reason I say the algorithm is actually the code is that it's a hardware piece, right? It runs on a computer, it has GPUs, it has screens, and it's very likely that in 50 years some of that stuff will break. Mm-hmm. And so I deliberately already all the stuff is of course documented, and ideally people can still get a replacement GPU that still works, but in the end, if all that fails, the algorithm will keep on working because it's code. It will, so the principle will at some point be emulatable on some other future system, and that's why I'm saying that's okay. It's not the whatever size of the screen that makes it, but the way the system behaves. That's the art.
I have a question. Is that okay? Okay, so there's this sentence in a paper written by Frieder Nake that has haunted me. That is basically saying, in order to find the masterpiece in generative art, algorithmic art, we need to have critics and historians look at the code and read the code, analyze the code, and no one's willing to do that. And so, in your opinion, if we did have critics who would do that. I'm trying to do that more. But if you had someone do that, would you want them to look at your code as as poetry, as in the way that it's structured, the way the functions are named and variables, or would you really look at it as the instructions and what it was able to produce in the end?
Oh, I actually disagree with Frieder Nake there.
Ah, okay.
No, because I looking at the code is trying, looking at the pigments and say, oh, this is made of whatever iron oxide and this. So, and I think that doesn't tell you much about the art. So for me, it's more the level above where you explain almost what the system does. Mm-hmm. And it's not really important if it uses whatever Python or JavaScript or something to achieve that, but it's really more about the higher level where you have these Lego blocks of functions or this graph of how the information and the code flows, which is the artwork. So yeah, theoretically you could draw the whole way as a flow diagram, and also then people could look at it and say, yeah, it's more like a choreography almost of code, where it's also then somebody who's at least a little bit of course, as a critic, you have to also have a knowledge about the history of whatever field you're in, so the possibilities, what other people have done, but then you might be able to judge it just by the functional diagram, not by looking at line 20 of
something. I've been trying to make it a point in art blocks like curation and looking at the artists that are submitting their works and looking through their code and seeing how they are organizing their functions and their algorithms and looking at how they name them. And sometimes it's really easy to read, and as someone who's reviewing it, that's really nice. I will use Maya Mann's, for example. Like, I loved reading Maya's code. It was so refreshing and fun, and her functions were like winky face and like things like this, and it was really well composed. And then you'll go to another one that is like, I have no idea what they're talking about. I have no idea. I have no idea why their functions are named the way that they are. I have no idea why they. And so I was just curious.
I mean, in some sense, you're right. Yeah. Like looking at the source code will tell you definitely something about the character of the person writing it. Like, yeah, in a way, almost like how you name your functions or how you structure your code. If you're using spaces or tabs, I mean, like, who uses tabs? but yeah, so it definitely is another piece of information that can be interesting if you can compare styles. And I think you definitely learn something about the personality of somebody looking at their code. And well, that's why I don't show mine.
Kind of going off of that, talking about the purpose of code, let's talk about what the function of code is. And Sophia, maybe we can start with you. Do you view generative algorithms as systems of enablement or just a system for creation, or as the artwork itself?
Oh, that was a question to me.
No, we'll start with Sophia. Basically, how do you see the function of code in an artwork? Is the output itself the artwork, or is the code itself?
Oh, I think that's kind of the debate we're trying to have now, which is like...
I want your take, though.
Yeah, there's a relationship there. I mean, I look at code also, like, trying to understand, like, is there such thing as good code or bad code? Is it kind of like a brushstroke? Could you say that a brushstroke is good or bad inherently? They're in dialogue with one another, and I think for the most part, that final output is really important. But there's a million ways, I guess, to make a circle. You can be really complicated about it, or you can also, like, I don't know, write an SVG. Use a P5 function. And so it's hard. I think that is the number one question, because as an everyday collector of generative art out there, like, they have maybe never written a line of code in their life, and they can still really appreciate the output and what's happened there. So them not being able to see the code doesn't limit your ability to appreciate the work. I think there's another side of it where I have been moved by code and seeing how someone writes their work and creates that final outwork. So it's hard to say, but one can't live without the other. Well, maybe the output, but they are intertwined. It's hard to give a distinctive answer, which is my answer.
Yeah, Eric or Danny, do you guys want to add anything?
So I think it's very interesting, and I think for me in the work that we do, it reverts back to the thing that I said originally, which was my excitement about code elevating process-driven practices to the levels of fine art. And so I think really in our context, I think the artwork is the final product. It is, let's say, the dress, it is the fashion, but the craft comes from the code. And I think there's also, not to get overly meta about it, there's also this argument or this question of how the artwork is perceived by the viewer. So I think in terms of generative digital fashion, if there is no fashion piece ultimately produced, if somebody was just looking at the code, it's such a far leap to imagine that code to be wearable in any context. And I think what wearability is going to evolve over time. But in any context right now, the leap is too great. So where we stand right now, the code is a crucial part of the process, but the final output, the art, actually comes in the form of the clothing.
I'll add to that a little bit, just in going back to the idea that a 6-year-old could do the art that I made. I actually do think that a 6-year-old could write better code than I write. I've never been very proud of my code. I've I've never been a professionally trained coder. I am very proud of the math in my code, though. And just if you look at algorithms when I first come up with an idea, and then like little by little, when it gets to the point where it's finalized, these things get tighter and tighter and tighter. They do the same things, but 20 lines of code turn into 2 lines of code. And that's something that I do become proud of, and like can have in like a personal artistic merit. But to add to that too, I think it's really interesting when somebody can interpret that code in physical in physical life. And so kind of to your point too, Mario, like, you know, in the future, let's say the device doesn't work anymore, but like you can see the code, you can emulate it. There's a dude on Twitter that has deconstructed the squiggle code and is literally redrawing it with geometry. With thousands of circles following exactly the same procedure that the screen is following to create the squiggle on screen. And to me, that is a really wonderful example and a demonstration of like the power of what code can do for automation, but then also just extrapolating it into the physical world. So bottom line, to me, it is the result of the code that I consider to be the artwork, but putting thought into the code and how it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, I think is incredibly, equally important. I just don't want to be judged by my spaces and my tabs because it is really, really bad,
I won't do
bad
that,
coding.
I promise.
Sarah, I think this might be an oversimplification, but when I was hearing Sophia and Eric speak, it kind of reminds me of when you read a book and you can imagine the stories and the characters and they come to life in your mind, versus when you watch a film and they're presented in front of you.
Context, yeah, it's high context, low context, right?
That's
Yeah.
a good way of putting it. I like that. Yeah.
I really like that.
Okay, cool.
I want to pivot a bit towards generative systems effects on businesses. So, Eric, a question for you. In what ways do you see generative systems and algorithms changing the art world and changing other creative industries?
Well, so I'm actually really intrigued by also what you said, Mario, about getting maybe kind of bored with stuff. Like, I think that's really interesting to then surprise yourself, and the kinky thing is...
We need kinky systems.
we need to talk over some beers. I'm really curious to get deeper into that. But I think that there's actually a really kind of interesting sweet spot where humans do like to belong to things. They like to belong to a larger family, and I think that there's been demonstrations of that throughout history. And but you know, being able to do something manually and belong to something based on scarcity is non-democratized. And there was a time when I thought that what Artblocks was doing, for example, was democratized, because it was very accessible to purchase things on the platform, because very few people, you know, were interested in it very early on, and you could literally have that experience of belonging to a family and revealing artwork in front of the artist. And obviously, like, I mean, if you counted the number of people that were diehard generative artists that at least I followed on Reddit, Twitter, and Instagram a couple of years ago, to me it felt like there was no way that there would be a lack of scarcity with what we were creating with Artblocks. And I mean, seriously, there was not very many, and it was just it was a very small kind of group of people. The demonstration of that just being blown out of proportion, and that no longer being accessible, and it being scarce at a new standard is, I think, it's just a perfect demonstration of what on-demand generative minting, or just like being part of a family, that, you know, owning something that you feel like you're part of something with an individual output, that like that leap that we went from 100 artists to 1,000 artists might be the leap that we go from 1,000 artists to 1,000,000 artists. But this technology doesn't change. Like, we have kind of cracked a code here where we can now go from 100 artists to 1,000 artists to 1,000,000 artists to 1,000,000,000 artists one day, and the technology can kind of remain the same. We've enabled people to distribute work to a broader audience, the people that want it. And I think that it's not just going to change art, although I think it's changing the way we look at art. I mean, generative art has been around for long enough to where, you know, the impacts have been felt for decades. But it is allowing more people to participate in a drop. And I think something that I find really beautiful is when you take, like, you go to a museum and you see like a Picasso, and then you go to the museum gift shop and you buy a postcard of a Picasso. The conversation and the dialogue between the person that owns the postcard of a Picasso and the person that actually owns a real Picasso is very different. in the generative art world, especially, I know there's a lot of kind of like frustration with traits and rarity, but there's also this like democratizing element where like two people can own an output from the same algorithm. One of them is an alien CryptoPunk, and one of them is just a regular CryptoPunk. And while maybe they're on a different scale financially because one can afford an alien and one cannot, they're having dialogue and conversation about the exact same project. They both belong in that conversation. They both participate equally in terms of the curiosity, the delight, the fascination, and all of that stuff. And that scales, just like it's scaled over the last couple of years. It'll continue to scale, and I think that both businesses, art, society, fashion, souvenirs, design, all of this will find that humans are interested in participating as an individual within a larger group. And we now have a technology that scales accordingly. And I think that's where the blockchain component is just so critical. Could CryptoPunks have existed if you had logged into a Larva Labs website and you were buying them from each other on a server using a username or password and a credit card? Like, I don't think that they would be what they are today. It's the scaling nature of an open decentralized system like the Ethereum blockchain or the Tezos blockchain that enable that. And I think we're just scratching the surface. Like, this is just a proof of concept that's really kind of about, to change the way we see business in general. Personal opinion, but yeah.
Endless possibilities. I have one more question for you guys, and in the interest of time, we're gonna do a speed round where everyone answers. What is a common misconception about art made by generative systems and algorithms, and what would you say to disprove that misconception? Whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to go first, and I think it's a pretty obvious one. I think it's to do with novelty. The idea that generative systems emerged since art blocks, for example, but even that they emerged since a computer is completely incorrect. The Greeks letting the winds blow over an Aeolian harp to generate music, that's a generative system. And I think for what you're trying to do with fashion, having that history is a very important context. And so I think, off what Eric said, I think when I think about fashion, I think about first principles. Why do people buy and wear clothes? And you buy and wear clothes because you want to signal who you are via self-expression, via your affiliation with a wider group, and via status in that group. And generative systems are the perfect extension of a way to do that. In the same way that they link historically back to couture, they also link historically back to core human psychological values in the way that we self-express. And I think those links are just crucial to draw as we move forward.
I'll keep mine very simple. It's a sentence I've said multiple times that generative art is not a replacement of human creativity, but an extension of it, and that's it. I'll leave it at that.
Well, let me try this. Not everything that runs an algorithm and is called generative art is necessarily art.
Nice.
That's fair.
That is true. That is true.
I guess one point that has come up a lot in the last couple of years for me is, do you have to be a creative coder to be an artist that uses generative systems? And I think there was a time when my answer would be yes, right? Like, my idols in the art world were the people I was following on Instagram, the people that were coding themselves. And I think there was a time where I would have been like, yeah, like a concept that was not coded by the person that had the concept wouldn't work. And I've come entirely 180 in that thinking, and there's a lot of examples of it, but one is just the conversation that we just came from, where you have like a duo that's focused on dance, choreography, the human body. They are also very technical, but they are working with a very patient coder in letting them interpret that into a system where more than one person can participate in the system. And this kind of leads towards the concept of conceptual art using this. Like, yes, you can use code and generative systems to create really fantastic looking things on a screen or that get printed, etc. But like, what happens when you take the concept of ownership within a larger group? What happens if you take these concepts beyond the screen? And that may not always be coders that come up with those ideas, but if the concept of generative art enables other people to do something that you find delightful, I don't think we should judge that personally. I think we should just find delight in it, and we should just look at it as art. Like, this is just good art, and enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah, Danny, Eric, Mario, and Sophia.
I can't place where this voice is coming from.
Proof of people times refraction. Thanks you all. Our next panel will start in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Our next panel, Art in the Age of AI, is going to start in about 1 minute. 1 minute call, Art in the Age of AI. All right, Proof of People and Refraction would like to welcome Danielle King, Ira Greenberg, Sasha Stiles, Connie Boschke, Chris Ostich, and AJ Berry to the stage. Our topic, Art in the Age of AI.
Oh, so glad you could. I mean,
Yeah, we met.
We're so prepared. Ooh. You want to size 7 persons? On my center. Oh, I would take this.
Yeah.
Do you know? They look very comfy.
I think pretty cozy.
Yeah, you got the best ones. So cool. You got really good ones. Yeah.
Oh, I think it's okay. Hi, everybody. Wow. I like the enthusiasm. Thank you. Welcome to Art in the Age of AI. I'm Danielle King. Among other things, I'm an artist, a collector, a sometime curator, writer, and my day job is that I'm the CFO and COO of Right Click Save, an online magazine about Web3, and Club NFT, which makes tools for collectors. I'll do a quick plug that Right Click Save this week is doing a special edition all about folks who are here at Proof of People. So Mikol did a wonderful piece that's been published about the VCA residency program. This one, Connie and I were actually in the latest cohort, so it's very, very close to my heart. So anyway, I hope you'll check it out. There's a lot of upcoming pieces, content about artists and folks who are featured here, so check it out. With that, I will do some intros. I'll start with you, Connie. I'm going to go alphabetical. So Connie Bacci is an artist based in Los Angeles. She was trained as a classical pianist and a biomedical engineer. No big deal. Working predominantly with artificial intelligence, she probes post-colonial narratives that emerge on the boundaries between synthetic and the organic, material and immaterial, the human and the non-human. She's an alumna of New Inc., which is the New Museum's incubator for art, technology, and design, and she was recently a resident artist in the most recent cohort of the VCA residency. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you.
All right. Connie is a star. Adam Berninger, who is down at the end right there, also a star. He's an artist, a collector, and he's the founder of Tender Art, which is a platform and community with a mission to propel generative art, including AI art. He is also a friend, and full disclosure, I am also a member of Tender. Welcome, Adam. Thank you for being here. All right, next on the alphabetical list is Ira Greenberg, right there. Ira is an artist. He's a co-founder of the generative AI platform Emergent Properties, and he's the director of the Center for Creative Computation and a professor at SMU. Ira also wrote the first major language reference on the processing programming language titled Processing, Creative Coding, and Computational Art. So he's a pretty big deal. Thank you for being here, Ira. Okay, moving on to our very fashionable friend, Chris Ostich. He is, but besides wearing an amazing sweater, Chris is a collector, and he's the COO of Transient Labs. They're building cutting-edge innovation tools for creators. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here. Okay, and last but certainly not least, right here next to me, my friend Sasha Stiles. I am loving the cheers right now. It's giving me life. She's a first generation, or will you pronounce the word?
Kalmyk American.
Thank you. I didn't want to mangle it. Artist and AI researcher, widely recognized as a pioneer of generative literature and language art. Her award-winning work fuses elements of poetry, art, code, AI, digital humanities, and Web3 creativity to probe what it means to be human in a nearly post-human era. She's also a co-founder of The Verse, and which is an acclaimed crypto literary collective where poems are art, poetry is code, and language is limitless. Thank you for being here, dear. You guys are just so amazing, and I am happy to be surrounded by so many great minds and also just like awesome people. So, to start, I was hoping that the artists could start out by talking just a bit about your practice and how you utilize AI in your art. So, Connie, Sasha, Ira, and Adam as well, since you are an artist in addition to the many other things you do. If you guys would touch on your practice, I would love to hear about it.
So a lot of my work and the themes that I explore actually stem from this post-colonial identity crisis. I like to say, I'm an American child of Taiwanese immigrants. So really, a lot of what I tried to probe through AI it's a matter of deconstructing, confronting, and maybe even reappropriating the binaries of a colonial heritage. And I find that the latent space, or the liminal space, of AI tends to be a really rich territory for exploring that.
Amazing. Sasha, would you go next?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, I like to sort of, start with a disclaimer that I'm a poet, I'm a writer, I'm a language and literature person who has stumbled into AI kind of by accident, a very serendipitous kind of journey. But I started working with artificial intelligence in about 2018 after just being really interested in a lot of what I was reading and researching about when it came to natural language processing. As a writer, obviously I'm fascinated with words and with language and with how we communicate and how we express ourselves. And I started to get really interested in articles that I was reading in maybe like 2017-ish about this area of natural language processing, which is sort of the intersection of linguistics and computer science and intelligent systems, and basically involves using algorithms, using deep learning to teach computer systems how to write like humans. And as someone who's spent her life, struggling to write like a human, I thought this was a really, interesting thing to dig into. So, again, I didn't really have a background in any of this, technically speaking, but I went down the rabbit hole and inspired by, the very small cohort of other writers who were kind of valiantly trying to adventure in this area, tried to teach myself what I needed to know to start working with large language models. I started with GPT-2, which is the ancestor of ChatGPT, which everyone is talking about so much these days, and started using more of an off-the-shelf version of GPT-2, and then over time began actually fine-tuning the underlying large language model so that basically I ended up sort of creating a co-author, an artificially intelligent co-author to write with, and I've been writing with that co-author, ever since.
It's amazing, and I have your book, Technology, which is just so incredible, and if you don't have it, you should. I'm going to give a plug for that book.
Thank you.
Ira, could you go next?
So I was thinking to begin, I'll do a confession where we talk about digital natives. I don't feel like I'm a digital native. I did write that book a number of years ago on coding, but I think that book was maybe because I wasn't a digital native. I'm definitely a painter. I think I see the world creatively in terms of my practice as painter, drawer. And my painting and drawing have spanned sort of very, very traditional figuration to pure non-objective abstraction. And I think it's that continuum where the computation sort of plugs in and out. Creative coding for me was very much connected to sort of the edge of the continuum relating to non-objective abstraction. So we can do all this kind of generative geometry. AI in the beginning didn't interest me very much. It had sort of an aesthetic that I found too imposing for what I was doing. But when Stable Diffusion came out, I realized that I could kind of move across that continuum in terms of computation and start addressing figurative painting. And this has been sort of mind-blowing to me. I hope we'll get into this more, but that connection to figuration and imagery in terms of kind of a generative space is something that I feel like I've been looking for 30 years, but wasn't really aware of it.
Amazing. Adam, do you want to touch on how you got into creating AI art and how it connects to your prior practice?
Sure. So my private practice similarly has been in painting and actually photography. I've been working in those mediums for really my whole life, and my pursuit with them has been a lot about getting so comfortable with the tools that I can create what I'm imagining and the feel and the communication that I'm trying to achieve just through intuition, so that I know those tools so well I can pick it up, not think about it, and have something come out that is both expected and unexpected at the same time. And from there, there's a very common, for me, a common editing process that then happens. And that to me is also part of the sort of artistic creation, just the process of self-editing over and over and over and over again. And I think that's a skill that, when honed, really transfers well across media. And so as I became introduced to AI art and the AI tools to create it, I found some similarities in initial iterations of some of the tools, not really feeling as intuitive or coming out with the kind of things that I could use sort of just very naturally. And as they evolved, I think it became something that fit better in with my process as a photographer, painter, drawing, where you get to that moment of I can pick up a pencil and sketch something out. I'm not thinking about how I'm going to cross-hatch or how I'm going to do the contour lines and all that. I'm just putting in words, or I'm doing something with the code that is going to give a somewhat expected output, but also really appreciating the unexpected things. And I think actually more so than probably any other medium that I've worked with, the unexpected is just that much more of a component of the art and the eventual art. And I think embracing that is really goes hand in hand with the editing process. It requires even more thought to go into that editing process. Like, what did I originally set out to achieve, and what am I willing to bend from that goal to maybe morph into something else because the AI has produced something that's that unexpected? Or where do I need to say, I'm going to cut this off and I'm going to go back to my initial intention because I'm not getting that thing. And so that's a really interesting dialogue that I'm excited about. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface with in AI art, but I love that. I see that in all of these artists' works and the AI art that I'm collecting too. That's the stuff I love and I look for.
Awesome. That kind of leads me into the next question I wanted to ask the artist. So I know with my work, there's definitely like a feedback loop mechanism that happens. I feel like I'm in dialogue with the AI, and I start with an idea, and sometimes, it spits out something really unexpected, and sometimes the unexpected thing is like weird, and I just toss it aside. But sometimes it leads me down a new direction and like inspires me and changes the direction. So I was wondering if any of you want to speak to how you view the AI technology. Is it a co-creator? Is it a tool? Is it somewhere in between? How does that sort of iterative process work in your practice? You want to take a step?
I'll kind of hop in here. When I first started working with AI, I'll be honest, I did look at it as a tool. I thought, okay, let me put in an input and let me get an output, and let's see what happens. But I found that with that process, I started out with a lot of specificity, and when I did that, the outputs they weren't even uncanny. They just didn't have any meaning or expression in them. And it really wasn't until I just scrapped all my preconceived notions about the machine and my relationship to it, and started looking at it and interacting with it like a non-human other or collaborator, that I started to get some really magical things. I'm actually going to kind of take a step back, because yesterday I was sitting in and listening on a panel with where Kenny Schachter was on the panel, and he made an interesting statement. He said, "Computers don't lie." And that kind of struck me, because in my mind I thought, it's not that they don't lie, it's that they reflect the truths that we've maybe agreed upon, or that they've just been imbued with, right? So, but I think what's really interesting to me in dialogue with the machine is deconstructing these truths, and which essentially become these binaries that are really reflections of our codified biases and our cognitive processes. So when I'm in dialogue with the machine, whether it be through text modeled natural language processing models or image synthesis models, it really comes down to really asking myself the questions of what are my truths, what are my biases, and breaking those down. And in that way, it becomes a really interesting feedback loop, because what I'm seeing from the machine, based on the outputs I'm seeing from the machine, I'm asking myself, oh, what does that actually mean to me? And how am I asking the machine questions? And what does that reflect about my own codification?
Yeah, no, totally. That makes a lot of sense. Sasha, what are your thoughts on this?
So I tend to think of AI sort of as my augmented imagination in a way. I mean, I definitely think there's elements of it that serve me well as a tool, but I think I've come to consider it more of sort of a partner that can challenge me when I need to be challenged, and can kind of go with me when I'm on a roll, and it kind of becomes different things, and it sort of shape shifts depending on how we're working together in a process. But I really I think what I value in it the most is that it's a way of sort of getting out of my own head and into sort of the head of a collective consciousness. And for me as a writer, I have found that incredibly valuable and liberating. I often think it's so strange that we have this trope of writers as being these solitary creatures who are kind of locked away in a room, coming up with our own, quote unquote, original ideas. Writers are and have been, for all time, very, very heavily influenced by the entire canon of literature that's ever been written and that, exists all around us. And all of us, even if we don't think of ourselves as writers, we're steeped in language. We're steeped in, idioms and syntaxes and alphabets. And, we all have touchstones in the literary canon that even if we're not, scholars or academics or, whatever, that we kind of latch onto. And I think there's something similar for me at play with AI, where all of the knowledge that's incorporated into these systems is sort of a vast canon, and it's allowing me to tap into all the things that I personally know, but also, this vast repository of information above and beyond that. And it's all kind of interlinked and related. And so I feel like being able to plug my brain into that is like turbocharging my own abilities as a writer in a way. So I think, again, it's sort of a tool, but very, very fancy tool.
Exactly. Ira, what would you add?
So I spent many years evangelizing on code being a medium, not a tool. And I don't know if I buy it anymore, but I think with AI, my tendencies tend to be very formally oriented, again, connected to my analog painting world. So I'm interested in sort of the artifacts of a system, right? So I'm thinking of doing a series on Getty images. For those of you who use Stable Diffusion, that may mean something. So we're still resisting the medium a little bit, and I'm going to call it a medium for now. We're resisting it. We're trying to get rid of these kind of edge cases. When we do long-form AI for emergent properties, we're always trying to kind of avoid these kinds of tendencies. But this is really the artifact of them at this point in time of the medium. The way oil paint drips, we get copyrights and Getty images. But I'm really, really interested in exploring sort of the edges where the engine, and I don't mean to knock engineers, and they have wonderful intentions, but perfecting a system is not necessarily what's best for an artist, right? I love the current version of Stable Diffusion about 1.5, and that's pretty much where I'm stuck, because 2.0 is fixing things too much for me. So I'm really interested in where it starts breaking down as sort of as a system, because I have a bias towards work that seems somewhat agnostic in terms of how it was produced. So I'd like to create images that I'm not sure if they were done with the AI, with code, with photography, with paint. That's just something personally interesting to me. So that's sort of my interest right now, and the sort of feedback loop is playing along those edges with AI.
That's amazing. Thank you guys for those answers. I want to turn to the collectors for a moment. Chris and Adam, can you talk a little bit about how you discovered AI art and began collecting it, and what intrigues you, what interests you most when you're looking at collecting work made with AI assistance?
Me?
You, man, you got this.
Well, we're going to take this sideways now. Oh, boy.
Get ready.
So, I grew up in the internet. I sort of missed social. I missed mobile. So for me, the moment was very clearly seeing a tectonic shift in the world. Like, this is a moment, or when we zoom out from this 10 or 20 or 30 years, we're going to be like, this was a moment in history that will be forever, sort of, it'll be before and after. And I didn't want to miss any of that. So initially it was discovery and just this new interpretation of, like, I love what was said, imagination augmentation. Because the way I think about AI sometimes is kind of like we all did this shit, right? We talk to ourselves. When you get dressed, you're like, does this work? I don't know. Which sock do I have? Where are my socks? Does the dryer eat my socks? Where are my socks? So to me, that's kind of what AI is. It's the voice in your head. It's a translation layer between the voice in your head and the thing that comes out the other side. And so to me, that is an entirely new creative output. And as somebody who builds tooling for people who think and create, I'm like, I want all of this stuff. I want to, like, swim in it. So I probably was a total idiot when I started. I'm just no strategy, but I think over time, like the technology, I kind of refined both my eye and the things that I look for and sort of where I think we're headed. So for me, it's really about when I see process and story and frankly just outputs, I don't care. I don't care if the thing is amazing and I love the output. There's not a lot of me that cares how we got there. Conversely, and I'll say this, I'm talking out of the other side of my mouth. I get it. So don't be mad. I'm also hungover. So it's where was I? No, not being hungover. Not being hungover. We were on one side and then the other. Well, I'll come back. So
that's a good start. Adam, you want to take it from
come
here,
back
and maybe Chris will jump
I'll interrupt
back.
Adam.
He'll interrupt.
I like this. I like the storytelling thing you're saying, and I similarly, I'm an early observer and late adopter sometimes. You know, like, social media is not my home. You know, so I was reticent to get deep into Twitter. I still am probably not totally native, but with AI, early observer, and I think it was really seeing more proliferation of storytelling artworks coming into play and more conversations out there in sort of casual discussion that really piqued my interest to start participating and collecting more. And I think I'm very careful about the quantity of attention I have, and just I can't put it everywhere like nobody can. And so I kind of hesitated for a long time with AI. And I think seeing these storytelling devices and really unique takes on how to communicate what's behind the artwork, not just the visual, is what really drew me into not just the AI art I'm seeing, but the potential for it as a medium, or what I like to think of as almost like a sub-medium of generative art. And, you know, projects like Clown Vamp's projects with Truth, and seeing this ongoing narrative, you really see not only what is happening, but what can be done with it. And, you know, I agree, like, I still look for a lot of the same things I look for in any art from any other medium. I do also look for that little bit of evidence of AI in it, like that little bit of unexpected thing. And it doesn't have to look like AI, but it might be. My favorite thing is just to see that thing that I think no human would have thought to do that. No human would have thought to paint that stroke like that in a painterly AI work, or a photograph just could not. It's not like it has to have a fourth arm coming out of it, but it might just be this little quirk that would never be set up in a photographic looking piece of AI art. And so that does excite me about it, in it being an expression of the medium.
I remembered my thing.
You go for it.
Yeah. So I was saying that on one side, I collect things that speak to me visually, so I don't kind of care about how we got there. However, conversely, I love weirdness and nerdiness, and I love when somebody has a practice or a methodology, and they tell that story. That's one of the things that I think is a huge opportunity for us right now, is to get behind the scenes a little, particularly as collectors. Like, I want to, when you learn how many outputs you look at and how many prompts you rewrite, it is insane. If anybody in the world tries to say that that is not an art, then that's nuts. I will have that argument all day. So I love getting underneath the surface a little bit to hear how did we get there, and did you train your own model, or do you have your own? Are you a programmer? Are you a scientist or PhD, whatever it is, I forget. But that intricacy or forgive me for putting it this way, but like weirdness or nerdiness really speaks to me, and that's the stuff I want to get into. So that's kind of where my collecting started and has sort of directed over time. But sorry, I forgot earlier. I'll try not to do that again.
No worries. That was a great answer. Yeah, and I think for my part as a collector, similarly, I look for outputs that resonate with me and a story behind it. And I also really do love when there's information out there and I can dig a little more into the artist and see like, oh, this person is a painter, like a trained painter, and like now they're, doing this work in AI that is similar to, but different to their painting practice, and like seeing that progression and seeing that intention and that kind of arc, I think really is something I'm drawn to as a collector. This is a question for everybody. AI is crazily, rapidly growing and expanding and changing. What recent trends, developments, et cetera, in AI are you guys excited about? Anyone can start.
I'll start, and I'll be quiet. I think soon, I don't know, next 3 years, we're going to see like an exponential increase in just volume. We're going to see billions and billions of new things. We're going to see tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of new creators entering this world. So think about what that means for collecting and creating going forward, is that now like provenance and process and all those things we talked about earlier become an integral part of like what defines the space, and it helps us as collectors, like, or at least me, I think I'm going to have to be much more discerning about the kind of things that I'm looking at or intending to spend money to store in a wallet. And so that's scary as hell on one side, but it's also like wildly inspirational. I can't, it's hard to fathom how much we're going to see. And one quick note, I was talking to an investor, and this is the last thing I wanted to hear, was the investor was like, I just went down the rabbit hole. And I spent my entire weekend writing. He'd never done this before. And what it told me, this is a guy who thinks about economics and numbers and deal strategy. And now he has a translation layer where what's in his head can now become something. That was never possible for him before. And so I thought that was a kind of a poetic moment. It's like, good for you. And he's like, I don't think of myself as a creator. And I'm like, well, welcome to the ballgame. So that's an exciting thing as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry.
would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think from a creative standpoint, I think the trend that I'm excited about is that artists would not be defined by the use of AI. That the category of AI artist dissolves because we're seeing how AI technologies are being integrated in all different kinds of creative systems and softwares to the point of ubiquity, right? But what that means is there becomes an expansion of the creative process and an amplification of that on the human level. And I think that's what it really excites me most.
Yeah, I love that. I think, I have no problem with someone saying that I'm an AI artist, but I do think over time it's more going to evolve into, oh, she's an artist who utilizes AI among other things, right? It's one of the tools, mediums, whatever you want to call it, that an artist has at their disposal, and it doesn't define who you are.
Exactly, and I think what I love, sorry, Chris. Well, what I love is that now I'm seeing more and more, AI platforms and so being implemented in a larger creative process. So this idea of multi-layered creative processes that happen to incorporate AI lend themselves to once again richer creative digging and approach. But richer narratives. Kind of speaking to what Chris was saying and what Adam was saying as well. Your turn.
I was just like, how is it different than Photoshop?
Right.
When people first started using Photoshop, I'm sure that photographers were like, this is all over, right? Photoshop is, you're cheating or you're, I don't know. I'm not a photographer. I don't use it. Maybe the photographers could tell me, is that how it was when Adobe made Photoshop? But I would imagine that edge is going to soften, hopefully.
Yeah. And then, coming off of what you said about AI being used as sort of like a layer in these sort of like systems or processes where there's like lots of different things going into the art making, I'm going to toss it over to you, Ira, because it made me think of M-props and, this whole concept of generative AI, which is something I'm really excited about. Obviously, I had a drop on your platform, but I see a lot of potential for that in terms of how this can be expanded, how generative artists and coders can start utilizing AI in their practice and vice versa. So I don't know if you maybe want to talk a bit about that and your hopes, plans, et cetera, for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two streams. On one hand, what's happening with M-props, and I don't want to just plug our platform, but basically a pipeline where you can imagine plugging in lots of different types of technology, both AI and non-AI, but that pipeline could become as customized as each individual project, right? And we're seeing just this enormous proliferation of tools and applications of different things in AI. But the other thing, which is almost the other extreme, which I'm really interested in, is the connection to this history we have, especially in visual art. There's a lot of problems with the history we have, I think, because it's quite biased and narrow, but there's also important information that's been passed through. So, and this is going to be the stodgy academic in me, thinking about Cézanne looking back 200 years to the 17th century. I'm hoping that more AI artists are kind of looking at these points in time historically to kind of connect all this, right? Because I think for us to not be AI artists, that continuum needs to exist somehow. Hopefully the history is much more diverse, but it can't just be this thing that happened in 2000 and whatever. It needs to be something that's been going on in a kind of a way. It's maybe not linearly, but it's been going on for a really, really long time. So I'm sort of hoping for both those type things to happen.
Sasha, what about you?
Well, something that I wanted to say that I'm a little bit puzzled by, which I think is also tying with my answer to this question of like, what do I hope to see or what am I excited about, is it seems like we are kind of stuck, or we have been stuck in this kind of narrow idea of what AI art is, and a lot of it is tied to this sort of text-to-image, based production. And of course, I, as a writer who am using a slightly different, form of generative AI, I'm very interested in, for example, the literary side of things, which looks quite different in some ways from these image-based AI, but also some of the artists who were most profoundly inspiring to me make AI art that looks nothing like what any of us are collecting on the blockchain. I mean, I'm very inspired by people like Stephanie Dinkins, who's done really incredible work. talking to robots and using AI to create sort of family lineage and archives of heritage and things like that. Work by people like Trevor Paglin, and I think there's so much more. And what I'm really sort of looking forward to is getting over the hump of thinking that AI art is this very sort of like specific thing, and realizing how vast and how profound the implications of AI are as a way of thinking. Not as a tool, not as a medium, but like as a seismic shift in the way that we as humans create and how we understand our role as expressive beings. And so I'm very sort of interested to see what happens when, I guess for lack of a better phrase, like when the novelty wears off and we start to get a little bit more maybe it fades into the background a little bit more, and then we take it in lots of other unexpected and really important directions that we're not right now.
Thank you. Adam, what about you?
I mean, I think I echo some of the excitement around just the way that AI can transcend different media. And we're seeing it already. I mean, even what you're doing with MProps is bringing together a code-based works with prompt-based works. And that's a very natural intersection. And some of the post-photography work that we're seeing, bringing photography together with AI work, is going to lead to that result where AI work is just integrated within all these different practices. And I think long-term, what's interesting about that is allowing the conversations of art and art in markets, which is part of everything that we're talking about here, like it or not, is hopefully going to help it break free from the pyramid of value where paintings are at the top and things come below it and nobody cares about video art. So I'm really excited about when you see AI art doing things in motion, you're just starting to see, I mean, things have been done for many years, but to see the proliferation of that coming and know, like, we haven't even seen anything yet, I can't wait for that to not only take hold creatively, but also to influence back into the market and maybe make that medium something that is valued from a collector standpoint. And I think that's going to break beyond visual art as well. Like, I'm really excited about what AI music could sound like. Like the world's music is digitized. The data is already there. We could have any kind of track we want like this. And what will that result in? I'm so excited about that.
Yeah, I feel like, if we recreate this panel in a year or 3 years or whatever, like the landscape is just going to be completely different, because it's moving so fast, and they're, like you said, like I think it's going to, instead of becoming sort of like this trendy thing, it's going to almost fade to the background and just become an integral part of creative practices, like across the board. And so I think we are wrapping up soon. Do any of you all have any final thoughts, comments, things you want to ask each other? Controversial statements, perhaps?
Oh, me?
I don't know.
No. I am curious, for those of you up here who are creators, how much opportunity do you see in this layer of chat UX across tooling in the space? Like, I just, to your point, I think a year from now we're going to see a #1 song on the Billboard charts, or a top 100 song on the Billboard charts made by AI. I think we're going to see entire interfaces of what we know today as websites and mobile applications become literal conversation tools. So Airbnb is not going to have a website you go to anymore. You just talk to something and find what you're looking for by, prompting with it. So I'm just wondering, as part of your process, where do you see AI being able to facilitate the creation process anywhere along the journey?
Yeah.
I think there's so many different verticals to which you could apply AI, and I think that's a really wonderfully functional one. To be honest, I not unlike Ira, I come from more of a place of trying to break the machine. I was that kid that would break everything and anything apart to just kind of figure out, like, what is this doing? What is it? And I think I've kind of carried that on through adulthood. For me, it's about finding the anomaly, triggering the anomalies in AI, in the machine response. And in that sense, I feel like that's, for me personally, how my own creativity is amplified.
Kind of finding the edges a little.
Exactly to what Ira was saying about the edges.
Yeah, very cool.
You know, there's something else about the creative process, for me at least, that is not really material, and that's just this practice. And so, you know, somebody said to me, well, why don't you just start your prompts with ChatGPT and then let that begin the prompt to go into Stable Diffusion. And for me, there's touch points in the process that just feel good in a meditative way, like in a very non-intellectual way. And so I'm constantly titrating, so I'm still getting that with all these digital things, right?
Somebody say something controversial.
I'll jump in. One thing that I've been exploring more with AI is memory and my own memories. And the AI has been sort of like helping me surface memories and like change them and amend them. And so I just have found that as like a sort of interesting use of it in terms of, you know, memory is fallible. And Clearly. And I'm not young, you know, I don't remember everything. And, you know, when I look through old photographs, those jog certain memories, but are those memories accurate? And how does the AI interpret those photographs? And with me prompting from my memories. And so I don't know, that's something that I find interesting. And I think there could be a whole, I don't know, arm of therapy, honestly, that
totally agree.
Uses AI to explore people's past and traumas and whatever. I am not a mental health professional, but I feel like someone who is could use it for something like that, because it really it does help put, you know, into visual terms thoughts, scraps of memories, ideas, phrases that you may have from your past, and then, you know, that can maybe take you to some sort of a healing place.
Just jumping off that for 1 second. I mean, one of the things that catapulted me into working with AI is actually the opportunity to work with an AI-powered android named Bina48, who basically was and is a project about memory and about preserving memory. And basically, in a nutshell, this sort of experiment is all about how we can take data and turn it into something that, you know, when you power it with an intelligent system, when you power it with a neural network, that becomes sort of an approximation of a person's lived experience. So I'm very interested in sort of how training data almost becomes like a new kind of memoir or something like that. I think there's something really interesting about learning how to sift through all of the data, all the details that kind of make you, and figure out what it is that really you kind of need to pull to the fore to create something that feels like an authentic experience. I also just wanted to say, like a little segue from that, but since we're talking about AI, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that around the corner, one of the installations that the Verse was really proud to bring to Proof of People is a live AI poetry activation. We actually have an AI poet who's part of the Verse collective, and its name is Versa. And Versa is an emergent poet who's trained on all the human poetry of the Verse, everything we've published in the gallery. And we are working with Ross Goodwin, who is unarguably one of the foremost pioneers of AI literature, and we're working with him on sort of workshopping this poet. And this is the second time that Versa has come to write at Proof of People. So if you're interested in in having a live AI poem created, come find us over there.
And on that note, I think we will wrap it up, because I definitely want to go and do that. Thank you all so much for being here. I am just such a fan of all of you, both professionally, artistically, and personally. So I'm really honored to have you here. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of the Proof of People.
Proof of People times Refraction would like to thank Danielle, Sasha, Chris, Connie, Ira, and AJ. We've got our next panel coming up, FX Hash, the future of exhibiting and experiencing generative art. Soon as we can get those speakers up to the stage. All right, we would like to welcome to the stage Ozzy, Zealand, alias Trinity, Sebastian, Joshua, and William Watkins, and our moderator, Annika Meyer, going to talk about the future of exhibiting and experiencing generative art.
Any questions? Oh, it worked.
Ooh, sorry.
I think. Do we have a short break or do we start straight away? Yeah, why not? Hello.
Hello. Hi.
We just no. I'm checking.
Hi.
People on the left, would you like to join and listen? Sasha Stiles, Una. It's like in school. Lovid, Ira Greenberg. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Annika Meyer. I'm very happy that I'm moderating this panel and that I have these great people with me. The topic is the future of exhibiting and experience generative art. And I think this is the perfect location to actually discuss this topic. I have quite a few people with me. Trinity, William, Ozzy, who I finally stopped speaking German with, Sebastian and Joshua. Many artists, a collector, and someone from FX Hash. And since we have a true pioneer with us, yeah, where could he be? Oh, there, on the right side. Yeah, so I think it would be really exciting, Joshua, to hear from you. How do I say that now? How was it in the old days?
Well, hi everybody. Is everybody having a good time? Yeah, cool. So I just want to say thanks to everybody on the panel. I'm really thrilled to be among such great company. Welcome to ZeroSpace. I'm one of the 4 founders of ZeroSpace, so if you have any questions about here, come talk to me. I started doing generative art 28 years ago. And I did a talk last week in Barcelona, and I was explaining to people my first computer. The screen came in only one color. It either was green or brown. Like we didn't have color. So yeah, I think I was a traditional painter. I moved here to New York to go to an art school called Pratt, and somehow learned about computers in like '94, and started building stuff with code in '95 using Netscape 2. And I think I just had this epiphany that here was this thing that sort of had never existed. You know, you could sort of see like thousands of years of painting, and here was this thing that I knew was going to get better, and it's been 28 years of screaming at a computer to try to make beautiful things. Yeah.
And how was it back then? Because, I mean, we have quite a busy week. We have Proof of People, we have NFT NYC, we have ArtNet doing stuff, we have us doing stuff, expanded.art. We have an opening tomorrow at 88 Clinton Street. So all of us are doing things, right? And back then, there was like Ars Electronica and a few more things. And there weren't NFTs and people were collecting. So how was it? And I've been to Bitforums to see the show. Also I can highly recommend visiting Bitforums if you find the time. So how was it for you as an artist exhibiting art? Also because you've said, well, getting a computer, and I know from Herbert W. Franke, he started even earlier.
Yeah.
If he wanted to have access to a computer, he actually like really needed to know people from big institutions who had a computer.
Yeah. So, so many funny things I think have happened with me over my career, in the sense that I think somebody asked me the other day, like because we were talking about the first computer that I bought, and they said, what video card did it have? And I was like, it didn't have a video card. It was an onboard chip. Like there was not a peripheral that you put in. So I think the biggest restriction for me over the course of the 28 years that I've been making work, obviously, has been the hardware itself. And this presentation I did in Barcelona, I showcased like all 28 years of making work. And for the first 10 years, like none of it animated because the computers just weren't fast enough to animate a lot of the stuff that I was doing. And I showed this one screenshot of this, this image that I had made, and I opened it up. I was doing stuff in PostScript, so I was rendering everything to vector. It was 147,000 layers in Illustrator. And I was showing the screen that you could see, like it was just impossible to animate. And so I think the thing that's been exciting for me is obviously the technology and the hardware has changed where we're able to have things mature in a way where now we have shaders and we're able to do things that we just couldn't do 28 years ago. And even in this space here in ZeroSpace, we've got projection and we've got some LED walls and we've got facilities where the technology has changed in such a way where it's really the sandbox for the artist has gotten a lot bigger, which is exciting.
That's really great to hear. And Ozzy, you're from FX Hash. You've started as an online platform, and now you do more and more in real life experiences. I think this one where you're trying out new tech, and it's basically not only a free mint, but you sell, and I think you sold out quite a few of the drops, and I've heard Joshua is also nearly minted out. You can go there to the back and mint if you want. So how did you get from being an online platform to actually doing in real life experiences, and what do you have to keep in mind?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm super excited to be here with all these legends. I didn't even believe it that we could work with Joshua on FX Hash, but we've also seen this day, so I'm super happy to have all these amazing artists. We have 8 artists showcasing here at ZeroSpace, and all of them have amazing pieces. Some of them have minted out within 15-30 seconds, and there are still mints left for the ones who will come here today and tomorrow. So we made sure that everyone has the opportunity to mint their pieces IRL. And yeah, that's a good question. We started a little bit more than a year ago, and it all went super fast. It started digitally, and after a couple of months, we already had the first people saying like, hey, let's do something. Maybe go to this Hong Kong Art Basel event. Maybe let's do this in Switzerland and Paris, and then Miami and Lisbon, and it went so fast. I think after 2 months we got our first invite to a physical event, and back in the day we didn't even have a team. Like I wasn't around, I mean I was around as a collector. I was just, being the degen like everyone, and there was no team. So I think after a couple of weeks a couple of us went together and we're like, hey, maybe we should help Seifert out because it's quite some work. I mean, I can speak to the artists. Okay, I will do the finance. I will do the marketing, I guess. And then we had this grassroots team who is still behind FX Hash, and many of them are working full time already for FX Hash. And somehow it just worked out without any HR department getting people signed up, and it just worked. We never spoke about money. We never spoke about contracts. Nothing. We just did it, and people loved it. We started, of course, with these free live mints, mainly to make sure that people who don't know anything about blockchains, about digital art, like what it is, how it feels to mint your pieces, and to experience what everyone was already experiencing on Teslas, on ETH. So that was a great way to onboard people. And I think right now we're more than 1.5 years later. We've become the biggest repo of generative art, and I think it is time for these artists who have been doing these free live mint events also to, make a living out of it. And as we can see here, it's working out pretty well. Editions are getting sold. People are loving it. People know how to mint. There are new payment solutions. So it's all going super, super fast. And we're still trying to, get used to it.
It's also interesting that you said also back in the days, which is like 1.5 years ago.
Yes.
But I know that every week feels like, I guess, maybe 6 months, and compared to the traditional art world, I think like 2 years.
Welcome to Web 3.
Yeah, exactly. So we're really fast. And William, you're part here of the event. Also Joshua. So if you're when you're invited as an artist to like a physical event, is it different? Is it different for you thinking about a project and working on a project?
Yeah, I mean, being in physical events like this, you can really get to meet people and actually like see what people have to say about what you create and what you do. And it's really interesting to see like the piece as well on the big screen. Like this is the first for me to see it on a big screen like this and rendering live. So it is really interesting to like it changes a bit about my mindset about how I want to create my piece and how I want to display it and make people experience it live. So this is really something that is interesting as an artist.
And for you, Joshua, is it different that oh, this will be on view somewhere?
Yeah, I think my hope is that two things happen. I think one, you get people who want to navigate generative art, and there's these moments where I can get really nerdy, like very quick, and talk about some of the principles behind how a lot of the work has been created, which is very cool. And in my piece in particular, I've hidden stuff that I haven't written down on the FX Hash website. So there's hidden keys that do certain things in the piece that you would only know unless I told you. And I'm not going to tell you right now. You have to come up to me. So that's fun. I like hiding stuff in the work. And I think it's also an opportunity, I think for a lot of us generative artists, we're just staring at a screen for hours and hours and days, living with the work. And I think a lot of people don't realize, I mean, I can only speak to myself, and maybe you can chirp in as well, but I'm designing an artist whose job is to make a piece of work, right? It's not AI, I've given it all the instructions of, here's the colors you can choose, here are the brushes that you can choose, and so I'm really spending months and months, and sometimes years. I didn't tell you, but this piece that I have that's up right now, the code started in 2014. So that's how long I've been working on this code, trying to build this grouping of programming that thinks its job is to make art, and it tries to make art in a specific way. And so I think it also becomes a really great educational moment for me to sit down and say, here's how these things operate, and here's how they work, and here's how you're seeing sort of a moment in time. And this is kind of a nice segue to you, because believe it or not, I'm in 2 shows. I'm in FX Hash, and then on Friday I'm with this lovely man at Christie's. And they're both done with generative programming, except for with the FX Hash, they're seeing the code run, at that particular moment. And what you see is a surprise just as much as it is for me. And now what I've done with Sebastian and Christie's, I have a 1-of-1 at Christie's. That really is like time-based media. So in a sense, I've written all this programming, and then I've had to live with the work for months and months and months, trying to capture like the most beautiful moment that I can in hopes that Sebastian will love it, and then it's weird how I'm employing the same technique, but it's deployed 2 completely different ways. One is a surprise for everyone, and one is me literally staying up for months and months and months, not sleeping, trying to capture this perfect moment in time for Sebastian's show. So don't do Josh Davis. This is not what you want to become. It is a terrible way to live.
Not to mention, there's also a canvas included alongside the time-based piece.
Yeah.
So it's really fantastic, and seeing them side by side is really so cool. And for me, just in terms of this panel and exhibiting generative art, I mean, those are the countless ways in which you can exhibit generative art, and I think the possibilities are endless, whether it's print or canvas or a screen or a touch screen or a projector. I think, the possibilities are endless, and that's super exciting to me.
So as an auction house, when you choose artists for an auction and then also have a physical exhibition in mind, what are some of the criteria? how do you choose artists for an auction?
It really depends on the auction, of course. Our most recent one is really kind of like all sorts of digital art. We have like on-chain SVGs, we have digital abstract expressionism, we have generative art, we have AI photography. So this particular one is showcasing a diverse range of digital art today, and the displays are all very different. So we have a photographer who, you know, her artwork is up on a screen, but then she created frames and put prints in the frames, and it's almost like an installation as well next to the digital piece. So my criteria, it's like it all needs to work together as a whole vision. Of course, one of my goals is to make a generative art show and curation and auction at Christie's for sure. I haven't done it yet, but I would definitely love to, you know, showcase a diverse range of ways to see it, whether that's I think Bitforms does a great job. I mean, their show right now is amazing. You can touch things. There's projectors. There's screens. I think Sofia Garcia at Artix Code did an amazing job at the digital in 2021, where there was like a 3D hologram squiggle. Like to me, those are the really interesting ways in which generative art can be experienced, and I hope to bring that to Christie's.
Cool, that's great. And Trinity, nice to have you on the panel as well. You do the podcast Waiting to be Signed, and you're also a collector. So how is it for you as a collector to, is it really different to mint at home on your screen or, for example, on location?
I haven't had a chance to mint here yet.
You need to do it.
I don't have mobile minting set up, and I think that's one of those things that's going to be a potential barrier for entry for people who are at these events. I think it's on. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's not so much of an issue, but there's like that cognitive load of, can I mint this? Do I need a wallet? How do wallets work if I'm not a crypto native? And so those are some of the things that I think about when it comes to the events like this. Looking at what FX Hash will be doing in the future with, you know, parametric choice being available at live mint, so you're able to kind of turn on all these levers, turn them on and off to kind of get a sense of what you're minting. I think that's something that's going to be something unique and meaningful within the space. Because it's not going to be fully random. You have a sense of how these things are built over time, and it will be great for, I think, general education, for what generative art can be for the public, for people who might not know, for people who are not in this room right now, who already have that point of view of this is generative art. I love it. It's special. It's unique. And, you know, I think that it's going to be game-changing for the most part. But, you know, I think it's about being in, you know, from a collector's perspective, are you at your computer? Are you on your phone, like on the subway? Are you here in a giant space? And it's really being able to kind of understand where people are from an empathetic perspective and, you know, create experiences that will, you know, meet the needs of that collector. And just, especially as the digital art scene within the NFT space, it's really opening the aperture of who can collect and who will collect. That it's not the people who were collecting 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 500 years ago. It's something that's really being democratized at this point. And so I think that's something that's really critical for platforms, for artists, for anybody to really think about as they go through and, you know, figure out how they want to create and display the art that they're creating.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of important things, and basically what you say is that we have to figure out what we're doing currently, right? So we have to figure out how to do things in the present. And the topic is the future of exhibiting and experiencing generative art. Yeah, Joshua?
Well, can I just say, I just want to add on to what you said, because first I want to call out that one thing that's really surprising about the FX Hash platform is how many features that you're rolling out that enable generative artists to do things that you can't do on other platforms, which is commendable. The parameters thing is fascinating, and I've minted a couple pieces using the parameters thing, and I will say I'm kind of on the fence with that technology because at home I felt overwhelmed. That I didn't know, you know, it happened to be the piece that I minted had like 30 parameters. I was like, Jesus Christ, what am I doing? And to your point, I think that if you bring FX params in a situation that is live mint in person, and the artist is there to say, this is what this does and this is how it affects the work, I probably would have had a better experience because I would feel like I had someone educating me on what the parameters did to try to get to the thing that I felt like was me. Now, it took me I was up until 4 in the morning, as I told you. I was up until 4 a.m. like tweaking all this stuff, like trying to teach myself, like, okay, this is what this thing does, and okay, lock this in. But I think in terms of the future, I think as we see these kind of tools being deployed, where we can have these kind of in-person events, and the artist can be present to walk you through how the collector can be part of the creative process, I think is really exciting, away from the screen and in person for sure.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's very loud. To add to that is that, you know, with FX Hash, we've definitely created lots of tools with very, very wide options. And the reason we do that is so that artists can have all the possibilities, all the creative options they want and they need for their events, for their digital drops, for anything they can think of. With FX params, we wanted the options to be very wide. Anything could be an input. It could be sound, it could be a movement, it could be you behind your laptop going through all the params. And we just wanted to make sure that everything is possible that you want to imagine, and if it's not possible, then we are there to build it for you. And I think that has the potential to change many future events that want to work with FX params. And like Joshua said as well, once it's in a controlled zone, like a live minting experience where you have to do something very specific, like a MIDI controller that you have to turn around, or you have to make a specific sound. I saw one artist here who had an amazing piece where it was tracking your vowels, and that could lead to a specific output, which is amazing. And all these types of events, or all these types of drops, can happen due to these tools. And what we wanted to create was these tools, give it to the artists, give it to the event organizers, and take a step back and let them organize whatever they want to organize. Let them be their own entity without us having to like stamp our sticker on it or whatever it is. So we are really trying to bring generative art to the place it wants to go to.
And what you say is really interesting, because you are an online platform and also all the artists on the platform, because more and more events happen. We bring generative art now to gallery spaces, to physical locations, and prior it was like during the pandemic everything moved online because we couldn't go somewhere, so we had to figure out how to do all the stuff online. Then we figured out how to do all the stuff online. Now we're figuring out how to do all the stuff offline again, which is quite interesting. How do you feel about that? And because what you've also just mentioned, Joshua, yeah, that you said, oh, then you sit at home and then you don't know what's possible, you don't have anyone explaining things to you, but that's so like what things have been prior, right, before NFTs, and everyone was so sort of like sick of galleries, curators, whatever they called us. I'm also a curator and writer, and everyone was so happy to get rid of these people, right? And now everyone's like, oh, maybe it's not too bad to have them to explain stuff. So how do you feel about that? And also, Sebastian from Christie's, how's that for you, that people really love auction? You said I shouldn't grill you. I said I'm not doing it. But I have to be honest, people love and sometimes don't really love auction houses. So how is that for you?
Can you repeat the question?
Why do people love you as an auction house?
People hate and love auction houses?
Yeah.
Well,
no, basically, how is it for you? You know that we went from offline to online and now having to figure out the whole offline part. And why do you think some artists like really are keen on working with you and some are not?
yeah, lucky for us, we have galleries here in New York, so every auction that we have has a physical component. So Joshua's piece that has two components are up right now. It opens tomorrow. So that's really exciting for me, and that's one way to sort of bridge online and offline. And we also launched a fully on-chain auction platform as well. So we're listening to what the community wants and what they're saying. You know, if it's off-chain, none of the bids are on-chain, none of the settlements on-chain, and so it's this obscure sort of transfer after the sale. What we've built is everything is fully on the blockchain, and that's really exciting to me personally because the space is all about transparency. It's all about, you know, everything I just mentioned. So we're trying to bridge the gap, of course. You know, if you're just looking on your phone at a screen, you know, it's not the best experience. But we try to install everything properly. We, you know, have great screens. We photograph all the exhibits, which then go into an editorial. So we're trying to, you know, create the whole story.
And there's also two other things he's not saying that I'm going to say.
Is it something nice?
Sure.
Good.
I hope so.
You know, the first thing, like when I've been at Christie's one time before, and when that auction ended, you know, the thing still sat in my wallet, and then whoever, you know, won the piece, Christie's would say, okay, you need to send it to this person. The fact that they've now built this infrastructure is really great for artists because now there's the provenance, where I can see that I minted something, I actually transferred it to Christie's, and then Christie's then moved it on to the next person. So there is this record of, you know, how the work started and, you know, tracking, you know, where did it go? And if you look at the first piece I did at Christie's, you know, you'd have to go onto Christie's website, type in my name to verify, in fact, that I was part of that show. But now with this piece, you know, because it's been transferred from my wallet to theirs, that provenance is baked in, which I think is important, okay? And I will say that Christie's is doing a tremendous amount of work in not dominating shows with straight white guys.
I try really hard.
That's good.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, my personal belief, like, if you look at my wallet, which is public, it's mostly female generative artists. So that's what I believe in, and I try as hard as I can to put that onto Christie's. Of course, you know, we do what we can. We follow the market, so of course, we have to follow sales and where there's money. So there is naturally unfortunately, some percentages that are still askew. But, you know, we're hopefully making moves to make it a better space and more equal.
Would you like to share a bit about the lineup, that we know what we can expect?
Yeah, sure. It's public. I think it's like 9 artists. It's 16 pieces. Again, ranging a whole bunch of styles. There's 2 women. One woman has 2 pieces, another woman has 1, and then there's also a non-binary artist. So we're really just trying to get everything. Yeah.
Names.
Samantha Cavitz, one of the women. Brooke DiDonato is a photographer, also one of the women. Yasnir is the non-binary artist. Of course, Joshua, Rib Cash, Jack Kaido, Roop Renisto, who did Life in Rest America, an AI photography drop. I'm probably missing a few others, but that's the main curation.
Great, excellent exhibition. So we're very excited about it. Now we covered the present, and how about the future? Now you need to maybe become creative, and let's think about the near future, not like 10 years ahead future. So how do you expect things to change? And I mean, the really great thing, it's just like generative art and no NFT in between. And I think that's what I really find important. That's what I also said on another panel. I think we simply have to get rid of the 3 letters that people like really start understanding there's a history to what we're doing. So, and I find it also important that we show the pioneers, right? We're preparing a couple of pioneer shows in Berlin at our galleries, and people are really excited to learn about the history. So what about the future now? What are your expectations and also especially hopes as artists and collectors for the future of exhibiting art and collecting art? Let's think about the next 1 or 2 years, not like 10.
I mean, if you look at what the big artists are doing right now, you can see that, well, like you said, a lot of the artists are going from online to offline. And I think that the tools that are being created right now are going to empower that and make a lot more artists go in this direction. And so for me, like, the space is really going to move forward in this direction. And you can look at pieces like Pal from Iskra Vilichkova and Marcelo Soria Rodriguez. And For example, like they did like this mix of analog and digital art with an experience that I think was during 4 days. So like this is really interesting. You can look at Andreas Rowe. I don't remember the name of his piece, but basically he's weaving jacquard fabric that are part of the piece that is minting as well online. And so I think that a lot of artists are going to move towards physical things as well as digital, and this will be part of the experience and the exhibition in galleries. And this will become a performance as well as the digital component. There will be the exhibition and the performance in itself. So this will take more place, I think, compared to now.
So you think we're going to see more physical art exhibited together with NFTs?
Yes, I think so. And also
1,000,000%.
And also, like, all of these tools will bring so many different things, like on the digital side as well. If you think about, like, the possibilities of generative art, like this is one of the strengths of generative art. Like you create a system as an artist. So once this system is created, well, you can get the collector in the loop. You can get the curators in the loop. You can like basically do a lot of different stuff that you couldn't do in any other medium. So this is one of the strengths, and I think that more tools will bring more varied experience. For example, with big data or things like this. So I'm really excited about those aspects.
I think what also is important to mention is the fact that we should be talking more about the future of experiencing generative art, because I think we know very well how to exhibit stuff, especially digital artists know exactly how they want to exhibit their art. We know very well how to do that, but we should ask the collectors more, how do you want to experience digital art? How do you want to experience generative art? We've had, with FXH, minting installations where people could very easily mint their pieces, but that was it. It was very fast. You got your mint, saw it on your phone, and you walked to the other station and minted your other piece, which is fine as well. It is fast, it is, digital. But what we saw is that people want to experience, want to feel, want to touch the art. Just like when you go to a museum, you see a beautiful piece by Van Gogh. You want to sit in front of it, let it sink in, look at it. What does this piece do to you? What do you feel when you see it? And this does not happen yet enough in digital art. We see, of course, people like Seth from Bright Moments, who is doing great work by showcasing art in this gallery where you can experience the art with immersive music. And I think that is the way to go to, and also the way we want to create our tools to let these collectors experience the art on their own time, have more time to feel their art, to play with the art, and actually make it a relationship between the artist and the collector. I think that's what we should be talking about in the upcoming years, and it's not yet being done enough.
I kind of agree with you. I think like you were talking a lot about like the collector experiencing the art, but I would love to see in the next few years artists saying how they want their art to be exhibited. To me, like that's where it really starts. I think a lot of the great artists have a real vision for how it's being exhibited and displayed. So yes, the collector is important, but I think the artist should set the rules of how their work should be exhibited. And we have blockchain. You can put it in your metadata. Like I think it should be recorded in time forever. And if there's a certain technology, or screen or display or computer, like it should be recorded. And in the future, in 100 years, it should be exhibited how they intended. Or maybe not, and maybe their intention is that it adapts to whatever, but I think it should be specified, and I think the education, like artists should really specify that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with that, and I think that maybe the conclusion here is that the event organizers, the platforms, the auction houses should start listening in general to everyone, to the artists, to the collectors, and should less be the ones to say, hey, we're going to do this, 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 but first start with the question, what do you want? And then think about, can we do it for this artist? If you cannot do it, how can we do it for this artist? I think that's maybe the way.
Can I say two things? So, first thing is, if you come up to me, I'm going to tell you a little story. In my wallet right here, I have a card that says I'm part of the permanent collection of the Whitney. Now, I just want to let you know that when I got this piece put into the Whitney, they did not buy the technology, and that technology has now died. So technically, the Whitney owns a piece that they cannot play, which is conceptually hilarious. Okay, so there's that, which I find really fascinating. The second thing, I think, to talk about the next 1 or 2 years. Right now, you're in ZeroSpace 2.0. ZeroSpace 1.0 was in the city. We were across from Madison Square Garden. This was pre-NFTs. This was pre-COVID. We worked on the space for about 9 months, and we were really trying to bring interactive digital art to the public. And I had a particular piece in there that was this long floor, and the floor could be, I think, 7 or 8 different states. And in the ceiling, I had put a bunch of depth sensors. And the artwork actually didn't exist without the participant. So somebody had to walk across the floor, or dance across the floor, or crawl across the floor in order for the work to exist. And so this is like pre-me, like before NFTs and before the pandemic. And I think to what everyone is saying here, it's been fascinating because, like, I get an email from people saying, like, hey, there's this whole NFT, this is like 2018. He's like, hey, and Mike, I've known Mike for about 20 years. Mike's like, hey, there's this whole NFT thing that you should check out. And I literally spent 2 years literally sitting in front of a screen, having just built this space where it required people. And now I was stuck, by myself, trying not to go fucking crazy for 2 years. And funny enough, like when I did my Art Blocks drop, my Art Blocks drop was all about unlocking interactivity as rarity. So I had set up all these probabilities of how you could interact with the work, and some interactions were rarer than others. So some people could spin the art around and some couldn't. So it was this whole idea of, like, what if rarity was interaction and how you could interact with a work? So what I'm hoping is in the next 1 or 2 years, now that kind of everything's have settled down, people will be able to come to a space, they'll be able to walk across a floor or spend 30 seconds in a room, and it requires the participant in order to interact with the art. And after 30 seconds, maybe I generate an animation of what you did in that moment, in that space, and that becomes immortalized on the blockchain. That's where I want to get to. I want to get to mixing what I was doing 2 years ago with blockchain technology, being able to say, you are the participant and you're the brush in this system. So I think that's going to be the next 1 or 2 years. More physical, you are the participant that makes the art. That's going to happen. I am going to make that.
Let's do it.
With or without
Love
you.
it.
I mean, I think conversely, like, that's very much for the in-person experience, but, from a digital collectibles, non-NFT perspective, or NFT perspective as well, I suppose. We're also at this huge inflection point in technology where people are still looking to experience these things from the convenience of their home. And that's also from an artist standpoint. We're really not just opening up the aperture of who collectors are, but who artists are. I'm sure that there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who wouldn't have considered themselves artists 18 months ago, who are now have been able to release so frequently and just get so many reps in, and like putting things out for people to collect, to admire, and then just doing it again and again and improving themselves. And so there's just this huge people perspective, of more knowledge coming in, more community, more collection, and it's obviously that community's been there since the beginning, in 1994 and before that. But from what technology can do, and with a preponderance of generative AI, predictive AI, and being able to eventually start pulling those components into art, it's not going to be about what you can do in P5 or in processing or just plain old JavaScript. It's about like the combination of these different parts of technology and how is that going to enable us to experience and deliver art differently in the future. So it's not just necessarily sensors, where it's like you ooh or you ah, and you collect your vowels, but what else can be enabled? And how are the artists going to come together to make that happen?
Would anyone like to add anything to this? No? Then we're all happy, I guess. And I think we also have to leave the stage, I have the feeling. So thank you, everyone, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Proof of people in Refraction would like to thank Joshua, William, Ozzy, Trinity, Sebastian, and Annika, our moderator. Stick around. We do have some live mints going on in the other room and some installations in the back. We've got food, pizza coming soon, and drinks are available at the bar right now.